Hi, this is Ray Horner, and welcome to another edition of Horner's Corner. And this month, we get to sit back and talk to a guy who has communicated with us one way or another for about the last 50 years in the Akron area. It's my good friend, Mark Williamson. You remember him as an anchor news director at TV 23. Many of you remember him being a spokesperson for the city of Akron during the run of former Mayor Plusquellic, and for the last 11 years, working with Akron Public Schools, giving us the information for Akron Public Schools. Mark Williamson with us this month on Horner's Corner. Mark, thanks for joining us.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
You look great, I've known you for all these years. I feel like, I'm some old guy sitting here talking about, my life in retrospect, but I guess that's what I'm doing. But it's hard to believe how long you've been at it.
25 years. As a matter of fact, you and the former mayor, Plusquellic, were the first people that I had lunch with in the city of Akron. The three of us and Ed Esposito had lunch as Ed was introducing me to everybody. And we sat down, we had a chance to meet and kind of hit it off ever since. We even had a chance to do a little morning radio together.
We were on your show on 9/11.
That's right.
We were right when the oatmeal hit the fan. We were there. So anyway, hi.
How did it all
Hi.
How did it all start with you in broadcasting?
Oh my gosh, it's like so many people. And years ago, I was a theater kid at Firestone High School, and I did morning announcements, and it was the first job I ever got fired from, morning announcements.
I did too in my school.
Did you really?
Yes.
I was impersonating, whenever we would get a note to be read, I would impersonate the teacher or the principal or assistant principal who wrote the note. And
some of them not flattering, I take it?
Well, so one of them was our vice principal at the time, and I was doing his voice, which it sounded remarkably like Elmer Fudd. And I felt this hand on my shoulder, and it was the principal, and that was the end of that job. But like a lot of people, there's just something that you like about the simplicity of that kind of work. To me, it's difficult. It has its challenges like everything else. But at the end of the day, I was able to throw it away, come in the next day, and start over again. Like all brand new, create new, done, create new, and keep doing that. And television news was a little bit like that. And then when you get into the more corporate world of communications, you have long-term projects. You've got a lot of plates spinning in the air. I'm not wired as well for that as I am for just throw me an emergency, throw me a last-minute thing, turn the mic on and just let me go kind of guy. So I found myself feeling very at ease. And I didn't understand why people got nervous doing, radio or television. To me, it was just like talking to one person. I found it to be very easy, and I didn't find it to be that hard. So, and I can tell you, because the first 20 years of my career, I did that. And then the last 28, I did this more public communications, more structured environment thing. And that's a lot harder in different ways.
I've talked to you so
much. But you get holidays off. So.
Well, I've talked to you a lot in the last 25 years, and it seems like every time we come back and talk about the television days, the TV 23, you get a little bit more happy. You like going back to those times. You reflect on some of the newscasts, the characters, the team, and all that. Were those the best years of your communication life?
Oh, yeah. We were a lot of those folks that were at 23 back in the 80s and 90s are still working in TV. Now, most of them are behind the scenes camera people, editors, but there's some on-air people. And many of them have made good livings working in bigger cities, and they still say that the job at 23 was the best job they ever had. We had a lot of autonomy. We were a small station that was owned by a local family. There wasn't any restriction on labor. It was very, very kind of a free-form thing, and we were allowed to make mistakes as we learned. There aren't many places that are going to do that, right? So So what we used to tell people, like when I would hire young people, because that's all we could afford, I would say you're 99% potential and you're 1% proven ability. We want to flip that around, and when you flip it around, you'll make more money. But what we're giving you now is experience it's really hard to get. It's like a lot of jobs. Well, you've never done that, we're not going to hire you. Yeah, but I can't get it unless you hire me.
Right.
Well, we were the only place around that actually hired, I mean, really kids right out of college and put them on the air. And the idea was to judge the talent and be a good judge of the talent, but also make it a fun working environment. And I got to tell you, I have so many stories in my head that I can't really share, but I mean, about people that worked there, and morale was really good.
Yeah.
And we were kids. We didn't have a lot of adult leadership. I mean, we had people on the second floor in management. They'd come down once in a while and they'd do that. But for the most part, they trusted us to do the right thing. And I think we did. So you can go on in life and make more money and whatever you want to do. But when you look back, that freedom, the creative freedom that we had, never happened again.
You were born, raised Akron. You're delivering news to Akron.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about the other parts of your professional career on down the road in this conversation. But that had to be fun for you to talk about your city and a news development arena.
Yeah, and what the real challenge was that the city that I knew growing up, it wasn't the city we see today. We didn't have a downtown. There was no baseball team. We were creating news every day in an environment we were missing the center of the city. And when Don came in, Mayor Plusquellic came in, it was like right when we were kind of on our way out, baseball, convention center, a big investment in downtown. And all I kept thinking was, wow, if we were still here, look at all the news we would have to cover without even working hard. I mean, I see stories every day. Just the number of women-owned businesses downtown, the number of minority-owned businesses downtown. We have so much going on. There's so many great stories you could tell that if you were from Akron and you grew up with that, you'd want to share that with people. And a lot of what we covered was, stuff that wasn't necessarily positive, because there wasn't a lot of that going on. And Mayor Plusquellic really made the difference in giving the community a central city that was not only thriving and paid its way by generating income and hiring people.
Right.
But the irony was now we had all these stories to tell and there was nobody to tell them.
Yeah.
And that frustrated me. I thought, boy, what a shame we didn't collide,
Mark Williamson is with us. He is our guest this month on Horner's Corner. Of course, I'm Ray Horner. Mark with us. Mark, let's go back. You mentioned some of the stories that weren't so good. Has there ever been a story that sticks out to you in your career on TV 23 that was whether intense, really personified the community, or was hard-hitting, or really you guys really had to dive into and you were proud of?
Well, when Sir James Goldsmith tried to take over Goodyear, if you're an Akron person, you want to remain, you got to remain objective and not. But I got to tell you, it was pretty hard, because this is a company that's an Akron company. And growing up, most of my friends my dad didn't work for a rubber company, but most of my friends had a parent or grandparent or somebody they knew working for one of the tire companies, one of the many. But Goodyear was Akron. Goodyear still is. And the effort that Bob Mercer, who was the CEO at the time, that he put forth along with a lot of other people to save, and John Seiberling, to save that company was extraordinary. It's a classic Akron community come together effort that we saw. And I marveled every day at how this city really stood up. Despite differences, political and otherwise, everybody kind of came together. Just like with 9/11, right? And the fire truck fund, they donated the fire truck. That was after I left television, but those efforts where you would see the community coalesce that way were extraordinary, I thought. There were other things that were like Jeffrey Dahmer and some other things that were just disturbing that you see as a reporter that, and we were all pretty young. I mean, we were like grizzled veteran reporters, you know, like Carl Monday. We were sort of, you know, new to the business, and, you know, kids were going out on stories of things they'd never seen before. I mean, you know, people decapitated in car accidents. I mean, things that I wouldn't want my kids to see, right? And we were out there doing this every single day. Part of the joy of that job was not knowing every day what you were going to encounter. So there were those big stories like you're talking about, but then there were those daily stories when you just, you know, like a fire at the old Akron Baptist Temple, this giant landmark church just burning at midnight, just standing there watching this huge hulking brick structure just, you know, come down in flames. And there were a lot.
How, and I think we all miss it to a degree, but you being in the middle of it and you being in the communications industry, kind of like I am, how big of a loss was that for Akron when we lost TV?
It was huge. I mean, there's maybe a couple of markets in the country that don't have any television, just a couple. There are smaller cities that have 3 or 4 television stations. Look, I'm a huge critic of television news. I'm a huge critic of television in general. But the void that it leaves when you don't have a storyteller, and, you know, newspapers are going the way that they're going, but the visual element, as I said, when Plusquellic came in, we suddenly had visual evidence to go with the story. Fun, people downtown. I mean, when John Ballard was mayor, way before you got here, in the 60s, Plusquellic used to tell the story that whenever somebody came to visit, like another mayor or a governor or somebody come to town, Ballard had wished he'd had blinders on his car to pull down so they wouldn't look out and see downtown out of the windows of the car. He was embarrassed by downtown Akron because it had just, all the retail had moved out and everything had just turned into like a giant ghost town. So suddenly there was life there. And if you're a reporter in a community-oriented, this is like what you do, and you're the only one that does this, and you're the only one that's done it, community-oriented radio and television. You're not afraid to do positive stories. You're not afraid to tell good stories about things that are going on. Now, we all know that negative news gets more viewers. We absolutely got that, right? But we didn't care. We wanted to tell positive stories, and it wasn't always easy to find them. And then after we left, it just blew up, and every single day there were developments, new construction. You know, who would have thought that the restaurant business would be what it is in downtown Akron? Kids downtown. Look at Lock 3. Holy cow, that's like a downtown amphitheater that's attracting people for affordable entertainment. It's exactly what we need.
Well, and that's a perfect way to segue into the next part of your career. So you leave TV 23 and you become the communications director for Mayor Plusquellic, who you just gave the accolades to. That had to be fun, being part of that growth, that reimagined Akron, and you with the ability to talk about it and schedule that and work with the mayor.
Yeah, and he's brilliant, you know. He's a visionary. He's a really rare, you don't get to work for people like that very often, who is passionate and does the job for all the right reasons, because he's from Akron. He cared about Akron, and his name was on everything. He drove deals that other people were too squeamish to even do. You know, he would really go in there, and he saved a lot of jobs. In 1 year, we invested a lot of money, but for Goodyear, Infocision, Sterling, and it's terrible that I don't remember. There were 4 companies.
Bridgestone?
I don't think it was Bridgestone. It might have been First Energy.
Okay.
But anyway, and it was $100 million investment. $100 million, and this is 20 years ago, when $100 million was a lot of money. So anyway, but he didn't flinch. Like, we had a mayor that just went in there and said, we got to do this. Now, there were detractors and people, and he stood up to them. I mean, you just don't meet people like that, right? He had built up enough political capital as a popular mayor that he could sway people's opinions and he could take certain risks. He knew what they were all the time. Everything was calculated that way, but he knew what was best for the community. And he said, look, what would the cost be of if we don't spend anything? What if we lose 4 really important companies and all those jobs? They can go anywhere they want, Ray. You and I know that, right?
Right.
They don't have to stay here. So he had to give them incentives. And a lot of people criticize that, like, oh, you're selling this. But look, they're still here, right?
A lot of people didn't like the ballpark coming into downtown.
He took a lot of heat for that, right? Mm-hmm. So now you look at it, and he doesn't say, I told you so, at least not that I've heard. But people don't realize that. So working for him, there was such a dynamic job. We traveled to Serbia and Hungary, and he was invited to go overseas to help after Milosevic had been thrown out as the there's a socialist dictator in Serbia, and he was asked to go over with some engineers from our water department, sewer department, to teach them how to build landfills and how to have sanitary sewers and clean water. They didn't really know how to do that, and so he was an advisor, and we took some engineers, went over for about a week. I think we were there. I mean, he was well regarded, highly respected around the country. So, yeah, I mean, to get a chance to work for someone like that, and there's a big learning curve for a reporter. You go in there thinking, and he would say, and I have to edit this, but he would say, oh, you guys think you know everything, and just because you covered stuff, but you only know this much because you cover it, and then you go on to something else. And he was right, of course, he was right. And I learned from some really brilliant people that were on his cabinet, and people that served the city because of Don, right? They wanted to be there because they wanted to work with him. And you realize, boy, how many times does that come along in your career?
Right.
David James was like that, superintendent of Akron Schools, right? For the first 10 years I was there, David led by example. He's a kind, caring person, great sense of humor. Always in his life tried to do the right thing. Not a game, not a show, real, straightforward, honest, direct human being of high character. I'll work for that person any day. That's a real privilege too, because, not everybody out there is like that. So I really enjoyed that. That was again, I felt like that was a privilege because I went to Akron Schools.
Mark Williamson with us. He's this month's guest on Horner's Corner. Mark, let's go back to the mayor. And as you know, I'm a big fan of Mayor Don. I love that he owned this city. He was that son of a gun, but he was our son of a gun. Yeah. Let me ask you this, because you come from a background of journalism. Did you ever have to slow him down a little bit and say, hey, Mayor, let's take a step back, or did he usually do what he wanted to do?
Yeah, I tried that once. Yeah, no, he was a force. I mean, but you know what you do is, as Dave Lieberth used to say, he's always the smartest guy in the room. And so even when HOK was designing the ballpark, he gave them ideas that they hadn't thought of. And one of their engineers said to me after a meeting, what's this guy's background? I said, well, he is an engineer student and an attorney. He said, boy, I'll tell you what, this guy's got, he wanted to make sure that the ballpark, everywhere it was possible, local products were used. Anything made of rubber, plastic would come from polymer, rubber company, right? I remember the one meeting I thought was extraordinary. He said, he pointed to the schematic, the drawing, or the rendering, I should say, of the new field. And he said, what do you guys see down there in right field? And they didn't really know what he was getting at. And he said, let me show you something. I don't want to take my grandchildren to a ball game and sit way down the first base line and have to do this to see home plate for 9 innings. I can't do that. Why don't you take the right field seats and beveled them this way so I can turn this far and watch the game. And somebody looked.
Makes sense, right?
Makes sense. That's a great idea. So there you have it, right? But he was always coming up with those things. So just when you thought you might be able to say, no, wait a minute, So you know what, though? It was great because he had this confidence that it gave us confidence. So that when I would speak to people about what a terrific mayor he was, and people would do the usual, you work for him, you got, no. Let me tell you something, right? We actually have facts to back this up. The things that he has done. And then, people say, wow, I had no idea. Mm-hmm. And the thing is not having television, that was the irony, is it made my job harder because we didn't have television to tell people.
Right.
And really, I mean, just one station, just any TV at all would have been helpful, So not having that made it a lot harder to get that story out.
You then transition years later after working with Mayor Don Plusquellic. You go to Akron Public Schools, and you and I got together for a little radio business. And I remember the day you called me and said, hey, I'm taking this with Akron Public Schools. It's exciting. I'm an Akron Public Schools guy. It's going to be a lot of fun in the communication. So it's 3 different degrees of communication. So talk about that 12-year career.
Well, the one thing that's really different that I don't know if people probably don't think about it because they're busy with their lives, but public relations, right? Doing communications work for a public entity means everything you do is public. It's out there. If you work for a private company and a reporter comes in, you can throw them out and close the door. We don't want to talk to you. If we were to do that, a reporter has an alternative way to get information through a public record request. Everything we do is public because we're paid by the public. Makes total sense to me as a journalist, right?
Correct.
And so those challenges, I thought, fit me well because I got what reporters wanted. I understood what they wanted and why they wanted it. One of the challenges is that when you get parachuted in, like in this case, education, communications person into education, not everybody around you actually gets that. And they may think that you're on the other side. I mean, we had somebody at City Hall who was going to be doing an interview with, I think it was Eric at Channel 3. And I was prepping him for it. And I said, here's the questions you're going to get, and here's the way they'll be asked. And so I was being kind of antagonistic because that happens. And he forgot, and he grabbed me by my shirt. He pulled me across the table and said, you guys are all the same. And our public safety director said, he works for us now, right? This guy actually forgot, right? But it's good to have people like journalists in those jobs to understand what the media wants and needs and how to deal with them. Not everybody gets that. Right? Not everybody appreciates that. You've got to balance that. Like, you have to work with them, be transparent. Don't try to hide anything. You just got to give it to them and take whatever it is. Like David used to say, there's always another train coming down the track. So get this one processed and get off the track and make room for the next one that's coming in.
You mentioned public, though. Also, when you look at Akron Public Schools during your run there in communications, it's been some tumultuous times, right?
Yeah.
We've had 3 superintendents in the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. We've had violent, unfortunately, incidents inside a lot of the school buildings, but you're still trying to paint the picture that Akron Public Schools has good stories to tell, which they do, the academies, and we can go on, but a lot of people looking at you for different stories to get the story, but yet it's all in the public's eye. It had to be very difficult as far as Akron Public Schools communications director to look at some of these stories when a lot of people wanted to know what's going on.
Well, and 2 years ago, we had labor negotiations that were challenging, and we were in the news. I think I counted maybe 48 headlines on the front page of the Akron Beacon Journal in about a 3-month span, and very few of them were any good.
Yeah.
And at the time, we didn't do we really didn't do enough to work with that. We'll just put it that way, because we represent children. And it's really difficult. You get into a fight with your union, you get into some ugly stuff, but you represent children. So what the tactic at that time was to just kind of back off and just, I call it rope-a-dope, because Muhammad Ali did rope-a-dope, where you just stand there and you just keep getting hit. You hope the person didn't run out of gas.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't run out of gas, and we just kept we got pummeled. And so that stays with you, and you can't talk your way out of that. You can't do good stories to get out of that. It's I sort of equated it with when the Ford Pinto blew up, when people drove into the back of it. Ford didn't keep telling you what a great car it was.
Right.
Ford fixed the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and when you're trying to do that publicly, and everything you do goes to a board, and people watch the board meeting, and people are actively involved, it becomes a lot more challenging to get things done. It can take longer. It's a real balancing act, I think, to make this work. David was really good at it. Our meetings were kind of uneventful. They got the business done and everybody went home. It hasn't been that way in quite a while. And the board has a difficult job to do, and I think they work really hard to try to get to the bottom of things so that they can talk to the constituents about what's really going on, But when you're publicly communicating that to everybody, it can look like the Jerry Springer show. People think, boy, you guys are, and that's a problem for your image, because you're funded by the people that think, that transparency is really important, but it's also the thing that can make it a lot harder to get things done. I mean, I totally advocate it, by the way.
Mark, we've got a couple of minutes left in the show. You and I can sit down and go on and on with
I'm
this.
a talker.
But, I mean, you're Akron born and bred. We're lucky enough that you kept your career here in Akron, from television to communicating through the mayor's office to serving the public in Akron Public Schools. What do you like most about Akron?
I've watched it change so much from when I was a kid. And I think there's a resiliency here. People talk about it a lot. Like David Giffords is one of those authors and people that, he's always standing up for Akron. We have those people in our city that are just like Plusquellic, right? They'll stand up for us no matter what. And I like that about this community, because we've been through a lot. We virtually lost an entire industry that we didn't pin all of our hopes on, but I got to say, most of the eggs were in that basket. Yeah. And we have done I think a good job of transitioning from that into some other things that we're working, here. But manufacturing in general in America isn't what it used to be. And cities up here, I mean, Akron, Cleveland, Toledo, Youngstown, Pittsburgh, Detroit, build America. That's where steel, rubber, glass, cars were made. We build America. And in many ways, we were kind of treated like, because of the weather, it's gray, it's the Midwest, there's all that stuff. But the people that live here get it and really understand and appreciate the richness of the culture here. Like just this building we're in at BF Goodrich, it's just a remarkable structure that we didn't tear this down. It's being reused. It's productive. I mean, I think it just speaks to the spirit we have of to just keep your head down and keep going. And that's what I see as most remarkable.
I remember when I moved here 25 years ago, I was talking to people from Pennsylvania, and some people that I know who were presidents of the college, and they said it's the best town that no one talks about in the United States. And they meant that seriously. They said, you're going to get there and you're going to see what I mean. And they're exactly right.
So Dave Lieberth calls it the biggest little city, or the smallest big town, right?
Sounds like a song we got to write.
Yeah.
Mark, thanks for joining us this month. Always appreciate it, my friend.
Good to see you again.
There we go. Mark Williamson, our guest this month on Horner's Corner. Thanks for viewing and listening to the show again. I'm Ray Horner.